That, I think, was Philip Jones's case. I don't know what he used it for, but it had originally been a picnic case, I think.
All sorts of things.
That's where you keep your biscuits, by the look
That's
of
it.
it.
Well, no trip to your place would be complete without a cup of tea.
Right. This belonged to Walter Holy, the man who I heard that night in Wuppertal. Walter Holy was an inspiration. I learnt a huge amount from studying with him, and he was more than just a teacher. He was like a father to me, because musically he was a father. He looked after me, he cared for me, he took me on tour with him.
Do you see yourself as a pioneer?
No, I don't. I see myself standing on the shoulders of others, like Walter Holy, and I see others standing on my shoulders, and it's just a logical progression. And he wrote me a beautiful letter in reply to say, thank you so much for your very kind words. They mean a lot to me. I'm most grateful. So that was your Walter Holy. So that was nice. Dresdener Straße in Cologne. Yeah, he was a fine man. Admired him enormously. My name is Michael Laird, and I'm here to talk about how I discovered the valveless trumpet, the Baroque trumpet, and for me it's been a lifelong passion. I'm retired now, but in 1963 I was courting a young German lady who eventually became my wife, Inga, and her family came from Düsseldorf. And we went over in my Morris 1000 and we drove to Düsseldorf and to meet the family. And I thought, I'm going to combine this with a trip to Joseph Monke, the trumpet maker in Cologne. Cologne, very close to Düsseldorf. And I wanted to buy a rotary valve D and E flat trumpet. And we took a trip to Monke in Cologne to discuss with Frau Monke, who ran the company, about a purchase of a D and E flat trumpet. And while we were in there, we met this tall, very elegant gentleman who it transpired was first trombone in the Westdeutsche Rundfunk, the West German Radio Orchestra. And my German was non-existent, but my wife and he chatted, and he discovered through her that I was a trumpet player. Oh, he said, if you're interested in the trumpet, you should go tonight to Wuppertal, because our first trumpet from our orchestra, Walter Holy, is performing the Bach Magnificat in the church there. And I'm sure your boyfriend will be very interested to hear that. So I did the negotiation with Monke and ordered myself the D and E flat trumpet, and we got into my Morris 1000 and drove over to Wuppertal for the concert in the evening. It was a big church, absolutely sold out, and we heard this concert, Weihnachts concert, Christmas concert, and this is the 22nd of December 1963. And the first piece was the Utrecht Te Deum of Handel, which has 2 trumpets in it, then a Bach cantata without trumpets, and then the Bach Magnificat in D major. And it says here, Walter Holy, clarine. That's what they called the coiled trumpet that he was playing on. A valveless trumpet, which I think we're going to have a look at in a moment.
Sure. Well, let's have a look at them now. First of all, this is the magnificent case. Was it? You were just saying that it was Philip Jones's.
That, I think, was Philip Jones's case. I don't know what he used it for, but it had originally been a picnic case, I think.
Yeah, you can imagine the glasses and knives and forks, yes, and all sorts of things.
That's where you keep your biscuits, by
That's
the look
it.
of it.
Well, no trip to your place would be complete without a cup of tea.
Right.
But so this one was yours, wasn't it?
Yes.
And that's in D when
That's
it has
in
a
D.
crook. And then that one's in C.
Yes.
And then the one that's kept in the bag belonged to Walter Holy.
This belonged to Walter Holy, the man who I heard that night in Wuppertal. And he very kindly gave me that. And we think it's in modern pitch F. So it's not the one that he recorded the second Brandenburg on, because that would have been in old pitch, low pitch. But that was Walter Holy's F trumpet. Now, this was the first trumpet that I bought. I bought a set of 3 of these in D, and I formed a little group. And, oh, by the way, must tell you, the concert was absolutely sublime. Walter Holy, I hadn't heard anything like it before, because up until that point, we'd only heard Bach played on modern D trumpets. It was before I won't say the invention of the piccolo trumpet, but people hadn't developed the piccolo trumpet in B flat or in A, so that we played on either the B flat trumpet, the low B flat trumpet, or the D trumpet. And it was a pretty strident noise that my colleagues got on the D trumpet. And for the first time I heard this instrument, Walter Holy in control, making the most beautiful, sublime, subtle sound that balanced beautifully with quite a small orchestra, maybe 6 or 8 strings, 2 oboes, of course. And I was so excited by this that Inga and I rushed round to the stage door after the performance and waited for Walter Holy to come out, and we introduced ourselves. And I said, I'm absolutely fascinated by the instrument that you've been playing tonight. Congratulations, wonderful concert. I said, would it be possible for me to have a lesson or 2 from you? He said, yes, of course. You come and you study with me, you come and you stay with me, and we'll have some lessons together. He was very generous with his time. He wouldn't take any money. He gave me free lessons.
Wow.
So I went home and I applied to the Arts Council of Great Britain for a grant to go to study with Walter Holy. And I received an award of £100. And that paid for 3 return airfares to Cologne.
Wow.
And I went off 3 times during the next year and studied with Walter Holy in his home.
What was he like?
He was a very warm-hearted. You can see from photographs he was from Eastern European. He had very high cheekbones and this very, very strong embouchure, different from the long faces of some of us English, British. He had this very similar to Adolf Scherbaum, if you've ever seen photographs of Adolf Scherbaum. Very strong player was Walter Holy, wonderful high register, discovered the ability to play very high and very subtly and very quietly, as you can hear from his recordings, the second Brandenburg concertos. Very fine example of his abilities.
What was he like as a teacher? Was he quite strict or quite free?
No, very warm-hearted, very relaxed. There was plenty of laughter. He explained his philosophy of musicianship, and he took the beginning of the B minor Mass, the Gloria, and he explained to me how you build up deem dom 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 dee 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 deem dom deem deem, and he would demonstrate like this, building blocks all the time, and he played with this wonderful sustained sound, whereas in this country at that time we were da 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 dee dee dee, much more staccato and much less lyrical. He played with this wonderful sustained sound. It was a revelation to me. And later he invited me to go on tour with him with the Capella Coloniensis, which was his period instrument orchestra, and we did a tour of Scandinavia, and I've got a copy of the program here. We were just involved in a march, a Mozart march and a divertimento.
Right.
And we performed that around Scandinavia, and he was an inspiration. Wonderful man, and we kept in touch over the years. And when I started to build trumpets myself, the long form, I gave him a very poorly made instrument of mine. I don't know whether he ever used it, but he was very grateful. And
so that leads on nicely to the four-hole system, which you came up with, of course.
Yes.
So these instruments, which you called the clarini or clarine, so that had 3 holes.
Yes.
What was it that you found about that system that you felt needed improving or changing?
Well, we formed a little trio, myself, Ian Wilson on 3rd trumpet, John Wilbraham on 2nd, and we enjoyed playing these very much, and we used them for recordings for the BBC and for concerts. The BBC in those days broadcast a huge amount of music specially recorded by them for broadcast from BBC studios, and every Sunday morning there was a Bach cantata program, and they would perform record and broadcast the cantata for that particular Sunday.
Right.
And Paul Steinitz and Dennis Darlow, Paul Steinitz's Bach orchestra, modern orchestra of course in those days at modern pitch, and Dennis Darlow's Tilford Bach orchestra, again modern pitch, modern instruments, we would perform and record for broadcast the cantata for the coming Sunday. And Paul Steinitz and Dennis Darlow were pleased. They liked the sound of it because it was supple, subtle, not as strident as the modern D trumpet, easier to balance from the engineer's point of view, I understand. But the difficulty when it came to concerts was that they would tell us, the conductors would tell us, it's beautiful, but we can't really, can you give us more? Can you play a bit louder? Because we can't really hear you. Reason for that was, one, it was very small bore with a small bell. And secondly, if I'm facing the conductor, I'm blowing off to the side. So it didn't project at all well. So I decided, right, they wanted a bit louder. Let's see if we can produce something with a larger bore and that points forwards. So all the pictures, paintings from the time show trumpet players almost exclusively holding instruments that go out straight. So I went to Boozy and Hawkes and I bought a huge amount of tubing and bows that they used for B-flat trumpets and bells, all B-flat trumpet stuff. And I went to a neighbour of mine, William Bennett, the famous flautist, because I knew that he was an expert in soldering, soft soldering, which is what you need for these joints, and silver soldering for harder fixtures. And he showed me how to do that. And I spent a lot of time cutting to the right dimensions an instrument that looked very much like that. Then we came to the question of where do we put the holes? We knew where the holes went on the 3-hole system. The holes, incidentally, for anyone who's not sure, they are, this one is the octave hole, which is for security reasons. Makes it safer to play the higher E and top G and the C above that and D above that. And this hole here underneath is for the thumb, and that is for the F and the A at the top of the stave, because the F is too sharp by modern tuning, and by modern tuning, the well-tempered tuning method, the A is too flat. So that sharpened the A and flattened the F, and that is for the F sharp and the top B. So that's what those 3 holes were for, but I quickly discovered that if I was going to put those 3 holes on this instrument, the octave hole, as with this instrument, is in the same place. That's exactly halfway along the tube, which makes it an octave hole. But the thumb hole would have to be round here, and the for the F and the A, and the F sharp would be the F sharp would be here. So that couldn't work at all. There was no way I was going to be able to hold that. So I worked out that if that's for G and E and high C, my understanding of how woodwind instruments work, that if you were to come a little bit away from the mouthpiece, which is going to go in there, that G would become eventually an F sharp, a semitone further down this way. And if I went a bit further, if that was a semitone, then that would be a whole tone. So that should be F, and that's exactly how it worked out. It took a lot of trial and error and a lot of destroyed tubing to find the right place.
So this hole, then the one that's one semitone and that's the other semitone.
That's one semitone and
this
that's one semitone.
An alternative tuning of the first semitone then?
Because we needed something to correct let me get this right, to correct the A. So this, in effect, is the whole...
That's right, because the B flat you can also play on this.
You can play that. That's
and that, because it's a flat harmonic anyway, that's then a corrected version of that B flat harmonic that's been corrected.
So we needed to change from a 3-hole system to a 4-hole system. So that's the origin of those 4 holes, where they came from. And that was all fundamentally designed by Walter Holy in conjunction with Otto Steinkopf,
right,
who was a recorder woodwind maker in Germany. They developed this instrument, and built by, can't remember his name, Helmut Finke,
right,
who was an instrument maker. Germany is blessed with, every city has its own trumpet maker, still from the 18th century onwards. And this is Helmut Finke from Herford in West Germany. And they made that instrument, and I made a prototype of this one, and with some help from some of my colleagues, we developed it. Steve Keevy was very important, because up until this point, if I wanted to alter the tuning, I'd have to alter a little bit the mouthpipe length with a little tuning gadget here, and pull out the tuning slide as well, because these holes had to remain in proportion in the same place. So that had to remain, that octave hole, in the center of the tubing. Steve Keevy came up with a very clever system whereby the whole yard would move,
right,
and be tuned, and the holes would then remain in the same place, because by pulling this out, you're adding tubing here, this end before the holes, and you're adding tubing exactly the same amount as you pull out after the holes. So the holes remain in
and it keeps that octave hole right in the middle of the instrument.
Exactly.
How long did it take you to get used to playing, if you'd become accustomed to playing the 3-hole system? Did you find, to start with, you were all sort of fingers and thumbs when you played?
About 20 minutes. Yes.
Oh, right.
Worked hard at it. A few, the complicated passages from the B minor Mass and the Magnificat, that took a few days to sort those out. But I was so excited by this system, and it gave the conductors exactly what they wanted. It was a slightly louder sound because the bore was bigger, and of course then I could just lift the bell up and point it directly between the conductor's eyes, and he could get it.
Perfect.
So we got round the problems of balance that way.
So did you just do it in your garage, kind of?
In my garage, I had a workbench there, and a lathe, and a drill, and a blow lamp for soldering.
Great. And I suppose these chimneys and things are the bits that you'd have soldered on. It's not just a question of drilling a hole. You have to build the chimney that goes around it, and
Yes.
it's a bit more than you might think than
Yes.
just drilling the hole.
Yes, it's fairly complicated, but you get used to it very quickly. And I think I did these with soft solder, and these joints here were soft soldered. I've forgotten why I needed silver soldering, which is much tougher, harder, more resilient. But no, these were all soft soldered, and you build up a little kit of equipment.
Of course. So what happened when you came out of your garage and you practiced it? Who were the first people who started following your suit?
Well, again, it was John Wilbraham and Ian Wilson. John had forged a terrific career for himself and was beginning to work with all the major orchestras. So I needed a good second trumpet, and he wasn't available. So Ian Wilson became my travelling buddy, second trumpet. And eventually he went to the BBC Symphony Orchestra with John Wilbraham, so he was no longer available. And then people like Crispian came along, and Bill Stokes, and more and more players of my generation were learning this instrument because there was lots of work was becoming available.
Of course. And it was so successful, presumably it spiraled and the people wanted to follow the suit because it was going so well.
Well, we just happened to be in the right place at the right time. There were lots of period instrument orchestras being formed at that time. For example, Roger Norrington, London classical players. Goodness, my mind's gone completely blank. Help me. What were the other orchestras?
Academy of Ancient Music.
Academy of Ancient Music, Christopher Hogwood, of course. And they were recording Beethoven symphonies, Mozart symphonies, Haydn symphonies. And we just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And we were much in demand because, of course, for a lot of the repertoire, they needed trumpets.
Yeah, and I suppose you were at the forefront. Nobody else was really doing it in the early days.
In the first instance, I was the only one. John Wilbraham and Ian Wilson, we were the only ones, so we got all the work, which was great. Then to my irritation, everybody else started to play, and many of them played much better than I did.
I'm sure that's not true.
Absolutely. People like Crispian, and of course Leonard, later generations, David Staff, and Bob Farley. I calculated at I think I was the first one in this country to perform the second Brandenburg concerto, but within about 5 or 6 years there were 7 or 8 players performing it regularly to a very, very high standard.
Yeah, I suppose you've spoken to me before about the Roger Bannister effect, running the 4-minute mile.
The 4-minute mile.
You showed that it was possible, and so others followed suit.
Yes.
Very quickly.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
Mark Bennett, I must mention him, of course, an outstanding player.
Yes. So we sort of started this story already without talking about the trumpet without holes. Was Walter Holy interested in playing without holes as well?
No, I don't think he was.
No.
I don't think it had occurred to him.
Right.
Because the problem was, as we saw it, intonation, the tuning. Our string playing and woodwind playing colleagues would say, "Oh yeah, that's very nice, but the F is sharp," and "Oh, that's very nice, but the A is flat." And then that was very nice, but you missed the top C at the end of the last page. For security reasons, notes would go missing. So in those days, we were very affected by these opinions, and we wanted to play accurately and, in inverted commas, in tune. So I certainly never I never thought it possible to play the natural trumpet without holes. And I don't think Walter Holy was. He was a busy orchestral player and a teacher. He was in the symphony orchestra and he was teaching at a music school. I've forgotten where he taught, but I've got it written down there somewhere. No, we didn't consider that a possibility, and never occurred to me. And I didn't think it was possible. And until I heard Jean-François Madoff and Julian Zimmermann, I didn't believe it was possible. What they're doing now is just amazing and wonderful to hear. and I congratulate them and I salute them.
Yeah. One thing that wouldn't have been possible on the 3-hole system, if I've understood this correctly, is the note the G sharp, which is possible on the 4-hole system.
No, it's not possible on the 3-hole system.
Right. So, for instance, in the Brandenburg, you'd have bum bum ba da dum bum bum be da dum. So you have the A G sharp there as well. So actually, as well as making a few notes more secure and being able to put it in this straight trumpet format or twice curved format, you also found these new notes effectively. For instance, Cantata 51 is another one that springs to mind. Was that something that you were aware of when you were building it, or was that just a happy coincidence?
That was just a happy coincidence.
Brilliant.
When you've got 4 holes there, you think, well, how am I going to get that G sharp? And I can get it on 4th valve or 3rd finger or whatever.
Yeah.
So that was just a happy
Brilliant.
coincidence.
Yeah.
Byproduct.
You talked about Crispian earlier. How did you meet Crispian?
As a student, I went to Canford Summer School of Music because I'd heard the terrific things. They covered a huge amount of repertoire, symphonic and chamber music, and Crispian was on the same course, and we more or less fell into each other's arms. He's an extraordinary man with a wonderful sense of humour and an incredible ability on the instrument. He came along on his course, on our course, with a piccolo trumpet, a piccolo B-flat trumpet, which I'd never seen before. He'd made it out of a post horn, a Brusian Hawk's post horn, and stuck 3 valves on it. And he could play it. He could play Brandenburg too at the age of 17 or 18, whatever he was. He was way ahead of me, technically. And when I started work performing on the natural trumpet, he was an obvious man. And I said, look, what about having a go on this instrument? And of course he took to it like a duck to water. And we did a huge amount of work together. And he was, I would suggest, he and Steve Keevy were the 2 players that became first trumpets at the time that I was doing this work.
Were there any sort of standout moments after you'd come up with your 4-hole system, or even on the 3-hole trumpet, where you thought, this is the kind of thing I want to be doing, or that was amazing? Were there any concerts that stick out in your memory? Or?
I considered myself to be a journeyman. I was basically an orchestral, modern B-flat trumpet player. I was interested in the C trumpet with the 3-valve C trumpet, and I played the D and E flat trumpet. And then I was fascinated by Walter Holy and the clarino trumpet, and I became interested very much in the cornetto, the Zink, as they call it in Germany, which I was introduced to, and God rest his soul, the wonderful David Munro, who persuaded me to learn the cornetto, and did a lot of work with him and other groups. So I considered myself, my priority was to earn a living. I had a young wife and a small baby daughter, Nicola, and I wanted to earn a living. So it seemed to me as a freelance, I failed a couple of auditions to get into symphony orchestras, so I wasn't really an orchestral player and wasn't really interested in the symphony orchestra, not as a member as such of an orchestra. So I wanted to play as many instruments as I could to increase my chances of working. That's really where this came from. But of course, having discovered it and felt how it felt to play and heard what it sounded like to play, I became pretty much obsessed with it and played it as much as I could and diverted my attention as much as possible to trying to perfect what I was doing.
Going back to Walter Holy, was he a sort of person who was obsessed with the trumpet, or was he someone who it was just something he did and it went in the case at night and didn't talk about it much, or was he passionate about it as well?
I don't really know. I didn't get to know him that well, but he was such a fine player, both on the modern trumpet and the clarino trumpet. And he was steeped in the German trumpet tradition. He did a lot of recording, both for the radio and commercially, on modern and natural clarino trumpets. I don't really know, but I could tell from his enthusiasm, and he loved to talk about the trumpet. He loved to demonstrate things and explain things to me. I think he was passionate about it. I would say, yes, definitely.
I should have said before, actually, that the four-hole system, of course, became, thanks to you, what became the adopted method in England. But the system of 3 holes was adopted in a different way in Germany.
Yes.
Which involved adding an extra coil at the top so that the finger stretch you mentioned before was possible. And then players like Friedemann Immer and I suppose, I don't know if
Edward Tarr, yes, he was a 4-hole.
So in effect, there's almost like a family tree where at that turning point in, what year was it? Was it 1970 that you...
Something like that.
Yeah. So at that point, there became a very distinct turning point in the 4-hole, 3-hole system.
Yes, we divided. The 3-hole system was the one that we abandoned because it involved this extra loop, which didn't seem to be in any way authentic. Mind you, we have to understand that the 4-hole system is not, the whole system is not authentic. Jean-François Madoff and Julian Zimmermann are playing it as it should be played, holding one-handed with no vent holes of any kind. Must make that absolutely clear.
Yeah.
This was a compromise to help us play more safely and to play, in inverted commas, more in tune.
Going back to what's in the box, I brought a printout that you gave me in my very first lesson of an email that you handed to me, and you put it in an envelope and said, "Russell, I want you to read that when you get home." And I hope you don't mind me bringing this up now. It was an email correspondence between yourself and Graham Nicholson. And I particularly love the line that Graham says, "The older in life I get, it seems to be like a runaway horse, and I'm just happy if I can hold on to the reins and stay in the saddle." It's just a brilliant expression. But you talked about hearing Jean-François performing Cantata 51 in Edinburgh, and you said, "I didn't believe anything else was possible before this, and I was wrong and he was magnificent." And you say, "I feel some guilt because I feel I've been partly responsible for directing the next generation of trumpeters down a cul-de-sac. I hope they can find their way out." And Graham's response, I think, is absolutely perfect, because we don't need to be divided about these things. It's not that you play with holes or without holes. I think it's possible to do both well. And what Graham said, I would say that it was a natural and necessary direction, given what the trumpet had become. It would never have been possible to have attempted playing without holes without all the people who are willing to put their careers on the line to play the instrument firstly with holes. I see the whole trumpet as a stepping stone for some people to attempt to play without holes. I think that's absolutely brilliant.
That's very generous.
It is, isn't it? So do you see yourself as a pioneer?
No, I don't. I see myself standing on the shoulders of others, like Walter Holy, and I see others standing on my shoulders, and it's just a logical progression. We were lucky, I was lucky, me and my colleagues were lucky in that we happened to be around at the time that an interest in period instrument performance came to the fore. Before this, in the 1950s and 60s, there was no interest. If you wanted to put on a performance of the Magnificat or the Bach suites, you just booked the English Chamber Orchestra or the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, and we'd get our modern D trumpets, or a little bit later piccolo trumpets out, and away we'd go. But then people became interested. People like Roger Norrington, Paul Steinitz, Dennis Darlow, and Christopher Hogwood became very interested, and almost to the point of obsession, in what did the orchestras of the time sound like, because we very quickly became aware that the orchestras sounded very different from the modern orchestras, modern instrument orchestras. And the more we explored that and found out what the differences were, it became almost an obsession.
A good one at that as well.
Yes.
I know you had a flyer there that you wanted to show me with the picture of Gottfried Reiche on the front.
Right. Well, after my discovery of Walter Holy and the clarino trumpet, I came back to London very excited, and I was working with Philip Jones, and I mentioned, I heard this guy, Walter Holy, and playing this coiled trumpet. Oh yes, he said, we did a concert here a couple of years ago, and Walter Holy, I had no knowledge of this. Walter Holy came over and I played second trumpet to him, and we recorded some Bach, I think it was a Bach suite, and we produced this little brochure, little pamphlet, and it's got a picture of Gottfried Reiche here with his coiled trumpet, and this is a photograph of that trumpet there that we used for our performance. And there's the legend is, what trumpet did Bach use? And it just explains the experiments that were undertaken of Gottfried Reiche's copy of this coiled instrument, and Helmut Finke, English Chamber Orchestra, 1961 this was, and that's for you to keep, and you can do what you will with it.
So you called these instruments the clarino, I suppose.
The clarino was a description, I think, of the register that the trumpet played in. I think there's some doubt even about that, because Bach sometimes uses the name clarino to describe parts that he wrote for a trumpet that are quite middle register.
Yes.
But then some composers wrote the clarino as being the extreme high register. What's your opinion?
Well, it's interesting. Sometimes, particularly maybe not so much Bach, because it seems almost 50-50 whether he writes tromba or clarino or something else. But perhaps in the Haydn symphonies you can read into it a bit more. If it says clarino, it tends to be the lighter symphonies, and if it says tromba, it tends to be the Sturm and Drang.
Yes.
So it is interesting, though, to wonder why, from our eyes, it seems so inconsistent. But I suppose he was a busy man.
And they were obviously, having discovered this, having built this instrument, they needed a name for it. Couldn't just call it trumpet, because there were meant something completely different in a different context. So they called it the clarino.
It is it's an image that mystifies us all, isn't it? I think what you see is what you get in a way, but it's something that's, I think, fascinated me. And has it fascinated you in the same way?
Completely.
Yeah.
It's a mystery. Somebody, it might have been Don Smithers, who again was a pioneer. He was the first man that I ever met who attempted to play the natural trumpet without holes. He suggested that maybe they wanted a portrait of this famous trumpet player, and to have a portrait of to build a picture of a man holding a great big long instrument like this, it would have been very difficult to have fitted all that in.
True.
So maybe this was just a little chamber trumpet, a chamber music instrument that Gottfried Reiche occasionally used, but it certainly forms an interesting composition, whereas a great big long thing would have been difficult.
That's true. In modern terminology, it would be quite close to the camera, as it were.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So that's a possibility. But I believe there was an instrument like that was destroyed in the Second World War. I believe there is one.
The Pfeiffer, I think it's
The
called.
Pfeiffer, that's right.
Yeah.
But basically they didn't exist. Very, very few of them existed.
So jumping around a bit, but all in the spirit of conversation. Did you keep in touch with Walter Holy?
Not really, no. We'd sometimes, with St Martin in the Fields, Academy of St Martin in the Fields, we'd go to Bonn,
The Beethoven Festival.
the Beethoven Festival, and
Brilliant.
he came to a couple of concerts there. And it was good to see him. And I didn't really, to my shame, I didn't. I was a young man and desperately trying to create a career for myself, and I'm afraid to say I let things slip.
But you showed me something he wrote to you after.
Yes, Edward Tarr wrote a beautiful eulogy and asked me to write a few words, create a few words, and I wrote something along the lines of Walter Holy was an inspiration. I learnt a huge amount from studying with him, and he was more than just a teacher. He was like a father to me, because musically he was a father. He looked after me, he cared for me, he took me on tour with him, and he wrote me a beautiful letter in reply to say thank you so much for your very kind words. They mean a lot to me. I'm most grateful. So that was your Walter Holy. So that was nice. Dresdener Strasse in Cologne. Yeah, he was a fine man. Admired him enormously.
And he died in 2006, I believe.
Let's just check what Edward Tarr. 2006, 1921 to 2006.
Wow.
So he was exactly 20. I was born in 42, so he was 20 years older than me.
And if he was still alive, he'd be 102 or 100.
He'd be 100 and something.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's quite amazing. Well, it's great to have these instruments. I do play them occasionally.
Good.
And hopefully one day, if they're in a museum or something, there'll be a nice video to go along with them.
Right. Good.
But
Well, that's how they come to into existence. And good luck anybody who decides to take up the natural trumpet. Wonderful instrument with a wonderful repertoire.
Well, thanks, Michael. Thanks for talking to me.
Okay, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Zen, very much.
My pleasure. Yeah. Great.
Yeah. Would you like a biscuit?
Why not?
Yeah.
Would you like a photocopy of that?
Yes, please.